Welcome back to Coffee with Yvonne, a show for creatives and entrepreneurs. I'm Yvonne Pearson, your host, and darling, the founder of Pink Dollhouse Marketing. And you know what? Let's get all the things out the way first, shall we? Let's see. Merry Christmas. Let's see. Happy New Year. We gotta do that too. Happy MLK. Do we say happy for MLK? Because that's an honorary thing, so I don't want to be disrespectful. But happy MLK. I hope all the things are well since I was on hiatus, enjoying much needed time off, darling. But that is not why we're here. We're here for another Marketing Magic episode. And for those of you who are new here, who just joined the chat, how you doing? I'm Yvonne Pearson, the person who brings you all the things, darling, that you love about marketing creativity and make it simple and easy for you to understand. On this week's Marketing Magic episode, we're going to be talking about one of my personal faves in the creative industry, André Leon Talley, and the museum exhibit at SCAD that honors his life and legacy. And we're going to be breaking down the impact of things like, the visual piece of it, all the visuals. Also, how his legacy continues to live on in the fashion and creative space. So grab your coffee and let's chat. Full transparency, I'm recording this after a work day, so I shouldn't be drinking coffee in the first place because I'm going to be up all night, but that's fine. I got to edit this episode anyway because at the time of this recording, it is Wednesday. And the show comes out on Thursday at 3 o'clock, and I try to be very prompt about the show coming out on time, but tell the truth, shame the devil. Sometimes I get a little behind. And to be honest with you, you almost didn't get an episode this week because I forgot. I was like, ooh, I did agree to end my hiatus this week. I did. So let's get into what we're going to talk about today, which is one of my personal favorites, Mr. André Leon Talley. And for those of you who do not know, let me give you little materials. The materials from the actual exhibit. André Leon Talley, Style is Forever exhibit is at the SCAD Fashion and Film Museum, and this is associated with the school. The cool thing about this is André Leon Talley as a person was the first Black creative director at Vogue magazine during the 80s. And if anyone who has any knowledge about fashion history, Black people were not always included in the conversation when it comes to high fashion. A lot of times we weren't existing in the rooms where they were making the most decisions. We did not have input in key campaigns and things like that. So people like André Leon Talley really changed the game and shifted the narrative for those of us who were interested in going into the creative space, but unfortunately didn't see ourselves included in the conversation. And the exhibit itself, I'm going to read a quick blurb from SCAD, but the exhibit is a tribute to the enduring legacy of André Leon Talley, who was a distinguished editor, cultural icon, and beloved SCAD mentor and friend. The exhibition features nearly 70 looks from Talley's personal collection, including ready-to-wear, couture, and bespoke pieces, highlighting some of his most recognizable moments from legendary Met Gala to famed front rows, as well as more intimate occasions and celebrations. And if you see me looking down at my screen, it's because I bring notes to the conversation to make sure we're having an engaged and informed chat. Continue on with the blurb from SCAD. Presented across SCAD museums in Atlanta and Savannah, Style is Forever marks the 10th anniversary of the University SCAD Fashion Museum of Fashion and Film. Across his long partnership with SCAD, Talley curated acclaimed exhibitions and welcomed renowned designers to the university to share their insights, enriching the student experience while advancing cultural dialogue and exchange. So now that we got that bit of background information, so you can understand the context of the conversation. Similar to how you build campaigns with your campaign strategies, whether you're in marketing, communications, or any other creative field, you have to give background information or data to kind of build up to the reason why you're doing something. So now that we have rooted in the why the exhibit exists, let's go into the details of the actual exhibit. And this is the exciting part for me because I saw it in person. By taking a day trip to Atlanta, which yes, I flew for the day just to go see André. I flew from DC down to ATL to see this exhibit. And seeing the exhibit that was, to give you context, was in the work before his death in 2022. And that tends to get overshadowed when we talk about things like the Met Gala theme in 2025, in which Anna Wintour, the former editor-in-chief of Vogue magazine, because she's since stepped down for her role to step up into a more global head role, and I'm making that money. That's a long story short. But it tends to get overshadowed because everyone focuses on the Met Gala 2025 theme, which was about Black dandyism, and she honored him and his influence in the culture as well as the impact as being a modern day Black dandy. So this exhibit, Andre was very excited to have this exhibit in his honor. There's actually a documentary, if you have a chance to go to the exhibit, which is on display until March 1st of this year, until it moves to Savannah. He talks about, a bit of his story, how he was influenced by the church in his upbringing, as well as his grandmother who was into fashion, and discovering things like her scarves and things that she wore, things that were outward expressions of her creativity and style. And when you see the exhibit itself, when you walk in, it's almost like you're walking into a memorial for someone, right? I know when we go to exhibits, it's all about, the splash and, how big something can look to make it seem cool or social media worthy. Here, you slow down when you go to this exhibit. When you first walk in, it's on the 4th floor of SCAD, so it has its own dedicated space. You go, you sign the actual book. You can leave a message or something like that, which I did. And it reminds me of when you go to a memorial service for someone who has passed. You sign the book to show your respects, to show that you were there in attendance. Once you walk inside, you don't see anything at first when you walk in. You walk through these glass doors. And again, it's almost like you're being transported into a different space. You walk through the glass doors and immediately turn to your left. And you're almost... immersed is the best way to put it, but you are almost immersed and surrounded by these literal life-size mannequins of André Leon Talley. And the work that the team has done to make this exhibit feel like an honor and a tribute, the detail is just, it's magnifique all the way down. The mannequins, which hover above you because they're standing on a platform, but the mannequins are the height that he was, which he was, I believe, a little over 6 feet. But it's his height and his likeness and body shape because, as we know, Andre was, a thickums. He was a plussy, which is nothing wrong with that. He was not ashamed of it. But it shows his larger-than-life form and what he would have looked like in the clothes he actually wore. And what's really great about this is it forces you to stop and stand in his presence because you just don't see one of these mannequins. You see multiple of them lined up on either side. And the cool thing is knowing that these garments are actually garments that came from his wardrobe that he wore, that he actually included in his last wishes to give to the museum for this exhibit. Speaking about his personal story, I was really connected to because I've been a fan of Andre's work for years, but how he always had a reverence to his Southern upbringing and being, a member of the church. A lot of times people don't realize that for Black folks, a lot of our experiences when it comes to things like fashion and culture start with the roots of our grandmothers. It starts with the roots of our grandfathers, and then taking it even further, the church. The Black church, Sunday's Best, and we've talked about this on a previous podcast episode, but Sunday's Best is something that we took seriously. Sometimes we do. It depends on what kind of church you go to, because there's modern churches that, getting dressed up isn't a thing, no judgment. But then there's still churches where you better put that ish on. You better step out for Jesus. Yes, you should. But knowing that for a lot of us, our introduction to fashion came in those spaces. It came from seeing our grandmothers who are seamstresses, who one of my fondest memories about my grandmother, and I've shared this on a previous podcast episode in which I did talk about the Met Gala and the 2025 theme of Black dandyism, is my grandmother and that sitting room that she had. Her sitting room, and let me tell a story. Let me take on a journey real quick. Her sitting room looked different each and every time we came to visit when we came to Pennsylvania, specifically to Harrisburg, where my family is from. With my grandmother being from the South, your home is a reflection of your crowning glory, right? Because for a lot of Black people, that is, where we pour a lot of, making it feel beautiful, making it feel curated, making it feel like something you can be proud of. Because they try to take a lot from us, but they can't take our homes and how we feel when we're in our own safe space. So my grandmother, the sitting room, which you did not sit in that sitting room. You can see the lines in the carpet every time you came to her house. The lines in the carpet, because you did not walk in that sitting room unless you were allowed, because that's where she kept her piano. from when she practiced for Sunday service. But my grandmother, similar to Andre, was very much into fashion. She knew how to sew. She could upholster anything. She actually created she reupholstered the seats, I believe, at her home church, which, we still go to this day when we have family services for homegoings. And she actually redid the curtains in the church. We jokingly call it Pearly Mae's Church because of her contribution. Getting back to Andre, his influence with his grandmother, seeing her get dressed and get, put on her Sunday's best, seeing her put on her fashions, it allowed for him to see the beauty of what could be when you put on a garment, And that, I think, is so important to a lot of us within the culture. A lot of times in the earlier days, the only way we really felt our dignity or respect that we really did deserve is when we put on our Sunday's best, is when we had a chance to get out of those uniforms and put on something that did not identify us as being a point of service for someone else. It allowed for us to have an expression that was not restrained by someone else's idea of what we were allowed to be, an expression of that creativity. So for Andre, taking that inspiration and him growing up, he bought things like Vogue magazines where he was inspired by the stories. And being an educated Black man, especially, was a unique time in the time period because he, again, being from the South, education was something that, if you had the ability to do it, great. But if you didn't, it was more common that you helped on the family farm, or you helped with the family business, or you just, did more of a blue collar service-based job, which, again, nothing is wrong with that because a lot of us come from those humble roots, including myself, coming from a working class family. Andre, getting his education, he's a graduate of North Carolina Central University, and he got a degree in French literature. He went on to get his master's degree at Brown, so he is an Ivy League grad as well. And I think something like that is really important in the fashion space, and more so in the space of Black creativity, because things like education allows for us to have the knowledge, but also take that knowledge and take it to the next level and incorporate our culture within those spaces. When we get a chance to see what they consider classical art, what they consider the classics or things that should be revered and studied, we then understand, yes, that is great, but that is a limited point of view. Let me also show you how this is also considered classic literature, how this is also considered culture as well, by being in those spaces and leveraging that knowledge to include and build spaces of inclusivity for others. So let's talk about the audience engagement. I touched a bit on it in the beginning when I was talking about the actual exhibit itself, but the visitor's book was something I really love for people to sign as they entered. And then there was a digital guide, which, if you could see it on this, why am I losing my words today? If you can see it on this promotional asset, so marketer of me, promotional asset basically is when you have something like a postcard, a flyer, something that's tangible, or it can be digital as well to have as a giveaway or something to promote to your audience. So here you have a QR code that it should have a call to action, but I'm going to let that go. And a call to action tells you what you're supposed to do. Am I supposed to scan it? Am I learning more? X, Y, and Z. So it has a QR code here for people to scan where they can learn more information and get that digital guide. It gave people a chance to immerse in the space and learn more about Andre through that digital guide as they were walking through. Now, to be honest with you, there were people who were not familiar with Andre and his work. There were a couple of times where I had people say, this exhibit seems really cool, but who was this guy? And as a person who's a Black creative myself, that is something that those are the moments I speak up, because erasure in fashion and creative spaces is very real. A lot of times we're the innovators in these spaces. We create things. We move the needle forward. We shape the culture, but they forget to include our names when it's time to talk about that impact. So I did take it upon myself to talk about Andre and what I knew about him growing up, experiencing his work as a young woman, as someone who saw him on things like Top Model as a judge, who saw him at Vogue, front row at fashion events and things like that, and knew about his educational background. I took the moment to give them a quick history lesson about who André Mother frickin' Talley was and still is in terms of his impact. What I love too is once you understood and seeing these larger than life figures, you slow down. A lot of times what I see people do in these exhibits, they're so focused on being on their phone to capture the moment instead of taking in the moment. And the larger than life mannequins that stood on that pedestal make you stop and take in the moment of Andre. You saw things like, personal letters from his actual desk of people who he will write to in the fashion industry. You saw a dedicated wall that had a full length picture from top to bottom, floor to ceiling, of Andre, and then a quick blurb about who André Leon Talley was in terms of his education and impact. It was really great to see more of that personal side of him, because the fashion industry itself is thought to be like, it's just people who are superficial or surface level. But you see intention, and you saw intention in every single thing that Andre did. He understood the impact of his role, and he understood the impact of his visibility and leveraged it to build more spaces for others. And that was evident throughout this exhibit. So when we look at things like the exhibit ending, when you walk through and you go through the first hall and you're kind of almost transported via a portal into the next section that sets a different mood. So the first area was bright, filled with bright lights. The next area was more reflective and darker with overhead spotlights. When you got to the exhibit ending, there was a section to view the documentary I spoke of at the beginning. And it had open seating, almost like a repast. And those of you who are familiar with the culture, the repast is essentially at the end of a service for a loved one, is where you gather together to either share stories while enjoying food and, and still honoring that celebration of life. Because what we do in our culture is we celebrate a person's life. We don't just mourn the loss of them. We celebrate the life that they live and the legacy that they left behind. And in that space, it was open where you could see it, but it was just so beautiful the way that they set it up. There were tables and chairs for people to gather and sit around. And there was also, at the back of the room, another life-size mannequin of Andre, in which it looked almost like I can't think of the name, but I'm going to use the basic term for it. It almost looked like a statue, like a monetary, what's that called, y'all? You know how you have okay, I'm using my DMV references here. You know how you go to the Lincoln Memorial and you see Lincoln sitting there in that his big chair, and he has the pillars, and it's almost like you have to walk in to be greeted by Lincoln, essentially, in the space. That's kind of how they did for Andre, but just in a smaller form. So Andre the mannequin stood in all his glory in one of his mini caftans that he owned. And he was surrounded by things related to the fashion industry, as well as the special book they put together for this exhibit about André Leon Talley, which I own, was laying there with open pages. And I think the page it was on was The New American Dream. On the further right wall was the documentary I spoke of, where they were doing like the background about how they came about putting this together, even walking through dressing the mannequins and how the mannequins were formed, X, Y, and Z. So again, it felt like a homegoing service instead of just a museum exhibit. And this ties that through line of his love of church and his love of community. For those marketing takeaways, and the main one I have to focus on is that immersion builds emotional equity. When audiences feel like they're surrounded by a story, they don't just observe it, they internalize it. So let's go into his cultural impact. And again, this is something I've touched on throughout the episode so far, but to get a little deeper into it, let's talk about André Leon Talley as a modern Black dandy. I pulled this source from Vogue magazine, in which they were talking about Black dandyism for the 2025 Met Gala. And dandyism, according to the Vogue article, is often described as a style, but it's more than just aesthetics. The original dandy, most famously embodied by figures like Beau Brummel in 18th century Britain, was a man whose primary purpose was to stand out by being dressed and impeccably groomed. Brummel, whose personal motto was, "Don't talk about your clothes, let your clothes do the talking, period," revolutionized fashion by elevating personal style to an art form. He rejected the flamboyance of past aristocratic dress, favoring understated, sharp tailoring that emphasized refinement over ostentation. So to pull from Black dandyism, the point of the discussion that we're having, and this is additional information that's found in the article, It states, "It isn't just about looking good, it's a declaration, a defiant reclamation of space in a world that has long sought to define and confine Black identity." So, what exactly is Black dandyism? At its core, it is a fashion revolution, a movement steeped in history, resistance, and pride. But its impact stretches far beyond its rhetorical. It is a cultural statement, an act of protest, and above all, an enduring celebration of individuality. Also, key to note here too, when they're talking about what Black dandyism is, André Leon Talley's picture is featured underneath the definition. So, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. So again, Andre is a Black modern dandy. One thing we want to talk about, his larger-than-life presence. Again, the mannequins perceive how he loomed over the subjects, but in real life, Andre Leon Talley was a tall gentleman. When you're a tall Black man who grew up in the rural South, who was in fashion in a space during the 80s where acceptance wasn't really there in a lot of places, you really have to own every single room that you walk in. And Andre was known for being someone who went after what he wanted. He was bold. He went up and talked to people like what's his name? Andy Warhol. He would go after, positions that he wanted. He was honest about the fact that he was ambitious, and there was nothing wrong with that. He also let it known that he loved fashion. He wasn't hiding who he was to make other people feel comfortable. And I think too, even in this modern era where people try to conform to an idea of who they should be, it's hard to stand out and be unique and stand in your truth and be honest about the fact that you weren't made to fit in with other people. And it's okay. Andre was an early trendsetter for that. He was an early trendsetter in terms of what Black dandyism is in the modern sense, and also what style can mean for Black men. And, for those who are in the community of Black culture, whether you're in Black culture, queer culture, whatever, being and living in your unique identity sometimes can be very hard and also very isolating. We don't know who Andre was personally as an individual, but he probably did struggle from time to time, knowing that the things that he was doing were frowned upon because it was considered too effeminate or things like that, especially considering his height. People probably assume that he was more, masculine or traditional male. And when he comes out just being his dandy, like showing his personal style and things that he loved, it probably got a few people upset for things that are addressing their own personal insecurities and not nothing that had to do with him. But more importantly, he lived in his truth. And the journey that he took from being ambitious to becoming the first Black creative director at Vogue during that pivotal time in the industry from the 80s until 2013, he really did help move the needle forward from things that he did from inclusivity with models, with people who were brought in to work behind the scenes at Vogue. He also used his platform to mentor others. Mentorship is something that for a lot of us who are in positions of leadership, we do take very seriously. We understand that if I'm in this room, I can't be the only person who made it. I need to be able to use and leverage my influence to open the door to others or share that knowledge with someone else so they can get even further than me. A good mentor and a good leader is not just thinking about their own personal success. They're thinking about how else can I further and push the creative culture and the culture in general forward to make sure that other people benefit from my hard work, from my sacrifice, and from the doors that were slammed in my face that I can now open for someone else. He also did numerous collaborations. The collaborations to note, one of my favorites was Dapper Dan. He also worked with Tom Ford, will.i.am, and was the face of UGG for a campaign. And as I mentioned, was a featured judge on America's Next Top Model. And I think, in terms of my memory of Andre, that was my favorite things, was him being a judge on America's Next Top Model, because you really got to hear Andre in his element, where he was talking about, things like personal style, branding, things like that, what makes a model, things that help to kind of demystify what the industry was really like. The show was around for numerous seasons or cycles before that, but him being in the space working for Vogue and those higher end publications, he was actually in it the day to day and knew what these publications were looking for in terms of models and subjects for their magazine. He also wrote for numerous publications as well. So he just didn't serve as a creative director or a collaborator for different campaigns. He wrote an exclusive interview with our forever First Lady, Michelle Obama, in 2009 for Vanity Fair, and authored 2 books, ALT and In the Chiffon Trenches. So let's get into that marketing takeaway. Marketing takeaway that I would like to share with the group, I'm saying this like y'all sitting there right in front of me, like, but things like cultural authority comes from authenticity, not timing. When brands, personal brands as included as well, are rooted in truth, they don't just chase relevance. Relevance eventually catches them. So let's get into our last segment of our conversation before we close out the episode. Let's talk about the location in Atlanta and what message that serves to the greater audience. Atlanta, and this is coming from a DMV girly, so I'm gonna say something nice about Atlanta. But DMV to the core, 4-piece wings, salt and pepper ketchup, half and half, sweet tea. I might go get that too, by the way, for dinner, but that's not why we're here. But Atlanta is the first stop for this exhibit. So as I mentioned, it's in Atlanta, Savannah, and I believe it'll be in France later this year. Atlanta is one of the few Black cities outside of DMV where Black creativity, influence, and culture are produced and not just consumed. This also is a nod to his Southern upbringing and shaped his sense of, style and his reverence within the culture. So it really showed by having it in the South instead of just putting it in like a New York City. It really showed the respect for Andre and his background and what he loved the most, who he was in his community. Atlanta acts as a bridge between his Southern Black cultural traditions as well as global luxury and fashion in the industry, because Atlanta can be considered a fashion hub. Every city has their own personal sense of style, and Atlanta is known for being, Atlanta. They know how to put that ish on, whether it's multiple labels put on together at the same time, but they love their fashions in Atlanta. Also, placing an exhibit in SCAD Fashion Museum of Fashion and Film reinforces his deep connection with the school because he was dedicated to that school up until his passing. He was always there. He was always sharing resources, going back, doing speaking engagements, and like I mentioned before, mentoring. He was also the recipient of SCAD's André Leon Talley Award, which was formerly the Lifetime Achievement Award in Fashion, that honors influential figures in fashion, culture, and design. So they renamed the award to honor him. That is not a small feat. That really shows that he was someone who they held to high regard for the work that he did in the industry. Andre could have given his things to any museum. He could have gave it to the Met. He even could have given it to the African American Museum here in DC. He could have done that. There were so many places where he could have left his things and they could have did something special. But by choosing to do that, he not only supported SCAD up until his passing, but even after his passing, and is helping to drive traffic to the actual location. Because before, SCAD wasn't on my radar, and I'm a museum girly. But when I heard it was in Atlanta, I knew I had to see this in person. I knew I had to make the trip to go see and honor Andre for the work that he has done. And by choosing to do it at SCAD, they're bringing foot traffic to the museum. They're getting visibility on social media. Content is being created. Traffic is being driven to the website. And I'm pretty confident that now that they have that, that will give them visibility to go after even bigger exhibits at the museum to help further drive that engagement and also contributions to help them keep moving the work forward. Finally, the exhibition honors the 10th anniversary of SCAD, and also it challenged the idea that fashion history must only live again in traditional elite coastal institutions. We always think about New York, we think about LA, we think about places like that when it comes to fashion. Atlanta is not a place that we consider going to a fashion museum. Andre purposely wanted to change that through his work and his mentorship, and now through the legacy that lives on through this exhibit. In our final marketing takeaway, place is part of the brand story. Where you tell your story determines who feels invited, who feels represented, and how the message is remembered. Okay, I hope you enjoyed today's chat. And I know I did a little babbling, but again, André Leon Talley, we're going to keep saying his full government name. His mama named him Clay. I'm going to call him Clay. André Leon Talley truly was someone who changed my perspective on what I could do in the industry. I know I talk all the time about things like The Devil Wears Prada being one of my favorite movies, but André Leon Talley was one of my favorite figures and people in fashion. Seeing him and seeing someone who looked like me, even down to things like skin tone, seeing someone who was a deeper hue or a darker skin tone, who looked like me, who found success in the creative industry, was truly inspiring growing up. When you think about things like that, you can't be what you can't see. And up until I was presented Andre in, fashion and the TV show Top Model, I didn't even know that there were people who looked like me who held executive positions at Vogue. I thought it was predominantly white spaces. I didn't think that's the only thing that we occupied. We only occupied maybe runways, maybe we were a designer, but not on the corporate side of things. And knowing that he held that space, knowing that his voice was part of the reason why a lot of things, though progress is slow from time to time, but progress still can be made, whether it's a snail driving the charge or it's a tiger who's running the race. I don't know. I just made that phrase up. But knowing things like André Leon Talley was sitting there in those rooms, sitting there at those tables and advocating for people who may not be on the radar of an Anna Wintour or, of these high fashion people who don't know our culture the way we know our culture, lets me know that the work was worth it. It lets me know that the people that he influenced in his lifetime who have gone on to hold creative positions in corporate and beyond, we are really changing the game with what we're doing in our careers. And I thank André Leon Talley. I thank the André Leon Talleys of today, of yesterday, and the André Leon Talleys we have yet to meet. I know you're going to do great work in the industry and continue to influence and move the narrative, whether it's in fashion, whether it's in science, whether it's in any space that requires creative thinking and strategic planning, because your voice matters. And I appreciate you for joining me for this chat today. I appreciate you for listening to me ramble on and on about one of my favorite people. And I cannot wait to chat with you soon on another episode of Coffee with Yvonne. Okay, bye! Love you, Andre! Coffee with Yvonne is produced and edited by Yvonne Pearson. Coffee with Yvonne is created by Pink Dollhouse Marketing. You can catch the latest episodes by subscribing to Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.